Whew, it's a chilly one today. Welcome back. My name is Ryan Lowe and I do Frisbee videos on YouTube and try to help beginners get better at the game. Even if you're not a beginner, hopefully I've got some tips on here that have been helpful for you. Today we're going to be talking about the little known blind spot of Ultimate Frisbee and getting better at the game. And the blind spot isn't throwing or catching or offense or defense. The blind spot is actually the thing that you belong to, which is totally outside of your control, which is your team. And early on, especially when you're a beginner and you're very impressionable and you're learning how to throw and you're learning to set your grip, the players that you surround yourself with and the team that you belong to plays into that in a big way. So in this video, I want to talk about the things to look for in the team you join and give you some ideas on how to find the right team so that you can take off and become the best Ultimate Frisbee player you can be and to have the most fun and to develop the quickest. So let's get right into it. What type of team should an Ultimate Frisbee player join as a beginner, or even if you've been playing for a while but you haven't found that the game has clicked for you? What kind of team should you find? And the thing to look for as a overall quick answer is you want to look for a team that gives everybody a lot of time with the disc during games. So as much distribution of the disc as possible between the veteran players and the beginner players. Lots of turnovers, that's fine. Nobody's getting too upset about it. You want to avoid teams where that's not the case, where there are only a few key players that get the disc almost all of the time. And I say almost all of the time because even on a great team where the culture is awesome and beginners are supported, the key players on the team are probably still going to be making most of the throws and most of the catches because they're just that much more involved in the game. They can read the play better, they can be in position better, they're open more, they know how to increase the likelihood of their catch, and their team probably trusts them a little more because their abilities are higher. So they're just by virtue of being that type of more experienced player, they're going to get more play. And I don't want to come across here as if I'm saying only join a team where everybody gets exactly the same number of touches. That's not the case. It's almost never going to be the case. You kind of want to aim for a team where even though the key players are getting the disc most of the time, they're still choosing to throw to the beginners as readily as they're throwing to the other more advanced or key players on the team. And that means that over the course of a season, that team is going to improve much more, and it's really fun to belong to a team where that team level improvement happens season to season, and the whole team can feel it, and they feel that they've come a long way since the first game of the season. And that happens on teams where the beginners are getting a lot of passes or it happens more readily on those teams. You see bigger improvement on those teams where the beginners are used more because a beginner has a higher potential for growth than an experienced player does. And that if you just look at percentages, if you look at a player who's like 80% developed, so they're quite strong, they've got a 20% improvement area, whereas if you take someone brand new who's maybe only 10% developed, they've got a 90% improvement threshold. So in a season, it's not unrealistic to expect that someone who's brand new to the game can get twice as good or 3 times as good or 5 times as good as they started out. And that's just not going to be the case for your veterans. So developing those beginner players is in the best interest of the team for sure. The thing you want to look out for and avoid are teams where the handlers are looking off the less experienced players. And looking off simply means they see that the throw is open. They see that the player is open. Sorry guys, I'm shivering. It's like November here in Canada and just trying to liven up a bit. And looking off just means when the handler sees that they have an option available, but they make a choice that is not game circumstance decided on not making the throw. And that's just a really convoluted way of saying they don't throw to the player simply because the player is a beginner or not very experienced yet. Looking off happens to everybody. It's going to happen to you in your playing career. It happens to me all the time. And a lot of the look-offs, you don't even know you're covered. So you might feel as though you've been looked off. You might think you were a viable option, and handler looks at you and then chooses not to throw to you. Those aren't so bad. Like, that's just going to happen. And a lot of the time none of the time, you just never know what the handler's thinking. So to assume that they didn't throw to you because they don't think you're a good player isn't the best way to look at it. A better way to interpret not being thrown to is by quickly having a look around, check both shoulders, look all the way behind you and see where your defender is. Because what I've seen with myself and with the newer players on my team is they feel as though they're wide open and they're calling for the disc, and the defender is poaching them. So the defender is a little more experienced, and they know that because the new player is just standing there waiting for the disc, they can run in and intercept it. So sometimes the perception of being looked off isn't accurate, and it's important to, as a beginning player, make sure you're wide open. And sometimes it's indisputable. Like, sometimes there are just no players around and you're wide open and the handler has a clear lane to throw to you and they still don't throw. Those are the types of teams you want to avoid playing on, because probably in that situation you didn't get the throw because you're a new player and the handler doesn't want a turnover to result from you having received a pass and dropped it or caught it and then made a poor throw. So those are all things that should be happening in games. Beginners should be making turnovers. Beginners and veterans and everybody should be dropping the disc. They should be trying new things and making mistakes and developing and having fun. That's what we're going for. So avoid those teams where beginners are getting looked off. There are plenty of teams who throw to all of their players, and there's no reason to play on a team that doesn't do that. Another thing to look out for and to avoid is playing on a team where beginners are always sort of shouted at to dump the disc. And a dump is just a short backward pass to the handler. I say always, and I want to emphasize that, because you shouldn't, as a beginner player, always have to throw that dump pass. But the reality of your first and maybe your second season of play is that your throwing might not yet be strong enough to complete contentious upfield passes with a high degree of success. And in that first bit of your play, it's actually going to be very helpful for your team if you get really good at throwing that dump pass most of the time. So you're getting yardage by getting that disc upfield in the middle, little short pass, you get it. And as a beginner, a lot of the time, your best option is to turn around and pass it right back to your handler, who's probably moved up a bit as well, captured that yardage, and is now ready to make a more challenging throw, maybe swing it across to the other side of the field, whatever it may be. So I don't want to come across here as if I'm saying beginners should never dump the disc, because they absolutely should, and everybody should, handlers, veterans included. Dumping and swinging is a huge part of the game, and it's extremely beneficial from an offensive perspective. So the thing I'm warning against here is just, if the handlers on the team that you're thinking of joining or the team that you have joined, if those handlers are always pressuring the beginners to throw back to them and to always reset or dump the disc, and if they get kind of upset if you try some upfield throws, and if they're incomplete, or if you try even a long throw and it's incomplete, you can kind of gauge the necessity of you leaving that team in direct relationship with how upset people get on that team when you take those risks in games. The more upset they get when you try upfield throws or when you attempt a longer throw, the more likely you probably want to look for another team, because that's a part of the game. You want to be taking those risks once in a while, and it should be totally fine. In fact, your team should be stoked that you tried it. And so that's the upfield piece on that. The next one I want to discuss is playing time. Does everybody get equal playing time throughout the season and into the playoffs, even into the finals if your team makes finals? Does everyone still get as much play as they want? Early in the season, everyone's probably going to be, lighthearted. Everyone's going to be playing about the same amount of time in games. As you get closer to playoffs, you might start to notice that the more veteran players, the higher skilled players might be getting more playing time. They might be double shifting or staying out a bit longer, or if attendance is an issue and there's a need for players to double shift, it might be that only the strongest players are double shifting. And again, we got to go back to the beginner gains psychology of that's not a very good way to approach it from a team management perspective, and the captain isn't doing a very good job if that's the case, because everybody should be double shifting if they want to and if they're physically capable of it, or even if they're not. If they want to double shift, if the team needs players to double shift, everybody should get the option to double shift. Your brand new player is going to improve twice as fast if they get the option to double shift along with everybody else. And if you're playing on a team where it's even worse, where it's not needed that the double shift happen, where it's full roster, you've got plenty of subs, and yet you still have your all-star players staying out for 2 or 3 points in a row, and you're not playing on a touring team, and this is just recreational Frisbee where everybody's played the same entry fee, leave that team, join a team where everybody gets equal playing time. There's no need for double shifting to be happening for only the top players. It's better for your beginners to be double shifting and getting all that extra play time, that extra contact with the disc. It's better for the team overall, long term. How to find a team that, I'm kind of talking as though you have all these teams to choose from, and that might not be the case. So if you're on a team already and you're just happy to be on that team, make the best with what you've got. Try to put your best effort forward. And it sounds cliche, but the currency of respect on a team is kind of what it's what purchases more playtime. So the more your team respects you, the more the players on your team trust you with the disc, the more you're going to get the disc. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy there, where the more responsible you are with the disc, the more people are going to want to include you in the play. So I don't want to come across as saying always take risks, because that's where your improvements come in. You got to be taking those risks. But at the same time, you have to balance that with being responsible and valuing the goal of the team, which is to win the game. I mean, I talk a lot about having fun, but at the end of the day, we're also having fun within the constraints of trying to win a Frisbee game while the other team is trying to win as well. So just balance all of that out when you're thinking about how much risk to take. And if you find that your team's getting angry because you're always trying to throw these long discs and it's not working, it's probably your fault in that case. So don't come back to this video and type in the comments that Ryan told me to throw long every time. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying sometimes throw long, hopefully your team is pumped about it. Now, in terms of how to find that team, I'm going to assume that you live in a place where you have access to a recreational Frisbee team, that there are several, or Frisbee league, and that there are several teams in the league, maybe even several divisions. So there's maybe a beginner division, a competitive division. And my suggestion is that you don't necessarily put yourself into the league as wanting to join as a regular player, but I would say maybe in your first year of playing Frisbee, you try in the preseason to find pickup games and look for situations to play on several teams as a sub, because that way you get to be exposed to lots of different captains, lots of different experience levels, different styles of play, and different sort of vibes of how teams are put together and how they operate as a unit. And the more of that exposure you get, the more confident you're going to be in finding and identifying the perfect team to join when you come across it. Whereas if you put yourself, you might not have a choice. I mean, sometimes you just have to join the league in order to play at all. But many teams do need substitute players, so it can be better early on to get a feel for the league overall by playing for several teams as a sub than it can be to just be randomly placed on a team where you don't have any say over who you're playing with, and maybe the team you're playing with isn't really that interested in you getting the disc at all, and maybe they don't care much about whether or not you develop as a player, and that's not a great team to play for. So if you can, be a sub for a while, try to check out a number of different teams. A common thing that can be easy to confuse is that the top teams are too competitive and the bottom teams, as far as winning and losing, are less competitive and more fun. My experience has been that there's kind of a bell curve where at the very bottom it's not a lot of fun because everybody's losing, and at the very top it's not a lot of fun either because people are too hell-bent on winning. So I found that somewhere in the middle, sorry, my neighbors are celebrating, I think they're playing video games or something. Somewhere in the middle is the sweet spot where the team is experiencing a good level of wins and losses, and they also have a great mix of new players and experienced players, so there's a dynamic group of people where there's a lot of learning and coaching and things like that happening. At the bottom levels, there might not be that depth of experience on the team for you to get one-on-one practice with a highly experienced player, and that can hold your skills back as well. Whereas I mean, if you get onto a really high-level team, there might be tons of those players, those really high-level players who could really teach you a lot about the game, but they might be only interested in winning games because their team is so highly ranked. So if you can find somewhere in the middle where the team's kind of having fun and wanting to win some games, but at the same time they know they're not a top team, so there's not a ton of pressure, that can be a very good place for a brand new beginner to find themselves. So look for those mid-tier teams, I'd say. And I mean, don't discount the top teams or the bottom teams. I'm just kind of saying that this is a general guideline. There are going to be exceptions. Just find the team that gels best for you. And that's it. I hope this helps you think more carefully about finding the perfect team for you to join as an Ultimate Frisbee beginner or a newer player or a player who just wants to improve their game. As always, head on over to frisbeethrows.com. I'll throw a link in the description where you can sign up for my long forehand training video. It's an exercise where I teach you how to throw an IO and how you can translate that gradually into much greater distance with more spin control. Lots of people have been trying it, sending me great emails that it's been working for them. So if you're one of those people who's been practicing it, I'd love to hear from you. And if there's anything in your technique that I can help you with, I'm happy to help. Take care, guys. I love you. Bye.